"The farm belongs to me now," my son said. "You have 30 days to pack your things and leave." Aaron placed a yellow legal pad on my kitchen table, as if he were handing me a grocery list. At the top, he had written a date. September 30. My deadline. I looked from the paper to the man I had raised in that same house. He was 42 years old, broad-shouldered like his father, wearing the expensive work boots I had bought him the previous Christmas. His wife, Marissa, stood behind him near the sink. She did not look at me. I did not argue. I did not cry. I did not ask how my own son could force me out of the home where I had lived for 38 years. I folded the paper once, placed it beside my coffee, and said, "I understand." Aaron mistook my calmness for surrender. What he did not know was that his father had left one final file inside a locked cabinet in the farm office. And before those 30 days were over, that file would prove Aaron did not own nearly as much as he thought he did. My name is Ruth Caldwell. I was 67 years old when my husband, Samuel, died. Samuel and I owned Caldwell Creek Farm in southern Iowa. It was not one of those enormous operations with private planes and corporate offices. It was 612 acres of corn, soybeans, pasture, and stubborn clay soil that held onto your boots after a hard rain. The farmhouse sat on a low hill near the eastern boundary. It was white with a deep front porch, a red metal roof, and a maple tree Samuel planted the year Aaron was born. People in town called it the Caldwell Place. To me, it was the record of my entire adult life. Samuel and I had bought the first 160 acres when we were 29. We borrowed more money than either of us could sleep comfortably with. For the first 5 years, I kept the books at night and worked 4 mornings a week at the county clinic. There were winters when the fuel bill arrived before the grain payment. There were summers when Samuel came inside after dark with dust in his hair and worry in his eyes. We built the farm one field at a time. We also built our family there. Aaron learned to walk holding the edge of our kitchen table. He learned to drive in an old green pickup before his feet could comfortably reach the pedals. By the time he was 14, he could back a wagon into the machine shed better than most adults. Samuel believed Aaron would eventually take over the operation. So did I. For years, that plan felt less like a business arrangement and more like the natural order of things. Aaron went to agricultural college, came home, and began working beside his father. He was talented. He understood machinery, soil data, and crop pricing in ways Samuel respected. But Aaron also had a restless streak. He wanted newer equipment, more acreage, larger loans, and faster growth. Samuel preferred to own less and sleep well. They argued, but they loved each other. At least, that was what I believed. 6 years before Samuel died, he suffered a mild heart attack during harvest. He recovered, but the experience changed him. He became more careful about paperwork. He reorganized the farm as a limited liability company. He met with an attorney, updated our estate documents, separated the farmhouse parcel from the operating land, and created written rules for major financial decisions. Aaron complained about the meetings. He said families should not need contracts to trust each other. Samuel gave him a tired smile and said, "Contracts are what allow families to remain families when money gets involved." At the time, I thought Samuel was being overly cautious. After his funeral, I finally understood. Samuel died in late August after a second heart attack. That morning, he had been repairing a gate near the north pasture. Aaron found him beside the truck. By the time the ambulance arrived, there was nothing anyone could do. The following days passed in pieces. Flowers appeared on the porch, neighbors delivered casseroles. People hugged me in the church vestibule and told me Samuel had been a good man. Aaron handled most of the farm work. I was grateful for that. He met with suppliers, spoke to the crop insurance agent, and finished preparations for harvest. Whenever someone asked what I needed, Aaron answered for me. "She needs rest. She should not worry about the farm right now. I've got everything under control." At first, those words comforted me. I was not ready to discuss acreage, contracts, or bank balances. I could barely walk into Samuel's side of the closet. For nearly 3 weeks, I allowed Aaron to make decisions. Then the questions began. He asked where Samuel kept the original land records. He wanted to know whether I had signed any documents during the previous year. He asked if I remembered the password to the farm's business email. One evening, while we were eating soup in my kitchen, he said, "Dad always intended for me to have this place." I set down my spoon. "He intended for you to operate it," I said. Aaron leaned back in his chair. "That's the same thing." "No," I said, "it is." His expression changed for only a second. Then he smiled. "You're right, this isn't the time." But after that conversation, he stopped asking whether I needed help. He started telling me what would happen. He said I should close the clinic account I had maintained for personal expenses and move everything into the farm bank. He said my car was too old and offered to trade it in for a truck owned by the business. He suggested that I sign a broad financial authorization so he could handle things without bothering me. I refused. He acted hurt. "Mom, I'm trying to protect you." "I appreciate that," I said, "but I can still sign my own checks." A week later, Marissa arrived with brochures from a retirement community outside Des Moines. The community had walking paths, meal service, and organized card games. She placed the brochures on my counter and spoke in the careful voice people use when they have already made a decision for you. "You would have people around you," she said. "It gets lonely out here." "I am not lonely." "You will be once harvest starts." "I have lived through 40 harvests." Marissa pressed her lips together. "We are thinking about your safety." The word "we" stayed with me. Aaron and Marissa were not discussing my future with me. They were discussing it with each other. I began paying closer attention. 2 days later, I drove into town and visited the farm's bank. I did not tell Aaron. The branch manager, Mr. Harlan, had known Samuel and me for 25 years. When I asked for current statements on every account connected to Caldwell Creek Farm, he looked surprised. "Has Aaron not been providing these?" he asked. "He has been busy." Mr. Harlan printed the records. I sat in my car and reviewed them before driving home. Most of the expenses looked familiar: seed, fuel, repairs, insurance. Then I found 3 payments to a consulting company I had never heard of. The total was $12,000. I also found an application fee paid to a commercial lender in Omaha. There was no loan listed yet, but someone had started the process. That evening, I asked Aaron about it. He was standing near the machine shed, checking a tire on the combine. "What is Prairie Expansion Consulting?" I asked. He did not look up. "Just some people I've been talking to." "About what?" "Growth." "What kind of growth?" He stood and wiped his hands on a cloth. "There's an opportunity to add storage and upgrade the drying system. It would increase capacity." "And the lender in Omaha?" His jaw tightened. "It was only an inquiry." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you have had enough to deal with." The farm paid $12,000. It's an operating expense. Samuel required both of us to approve expenses above $10,000. Aaron gave a short laugh. "Dad is gone, Mom." The sentence landed harder than he probably intended. He looked away almost immediately. I know that sounded harsh. "Yes," I said, "it did." He walked toward me. "You need to understand something. I'm the one running this place now. I cannot stop and ask permission every time I make a decision. I am not asking you to request permission for fuel or repairs. You are questioning everything I do. I questioned one payment. And that is how it starts." I studied his face. There was frustration there, but something else too. Fear. "What are you planning, Aaron?" He shoved the cloth into his back pocket. "I am planning to keep this farm alive." Then he walked away. That night, I barely slept. At 3 in the morning, I went downstairs and stood in the dark kitchen. Samuel's chair was still pulled slightly away from the table. His reading glasses rested on the shelf beside the old radio. I had spent weeks avoiding the farm office because every object inside reminded me of him. Now I wondered whether avoiding that room was exactly what Aaron needed me to do. The next morning, I unlocked the office. Dust floated through the beam of sunlight, crossing Samuel's desk. His calendar remained open to the week he died. Beside it sat a coffee mug with a faded logo from a seed company that no longer existed. The filing cabinets lined the back wall. I searched the drawers for the consulting agreement, the lender application, and any correspondence with Prairie Expansion. Most of the records were organized by year. One drawer was locked. I knew Samuel kept the key on his ring, but his personal keys had been returned to me after the hospital. I found the ring inside the top drawer of my dresser. The smallest brass key opened the cabinet. Inside were 5 hanging folders. Taxes, insurance, operating agreement, land records. Ruth. My name had been writ in Samuel's blocky handwriting. The Ruth folder was thick and sealed with a red elastic band. On the front, Samuel had written one sentence: "Open this before signing anything Aaron gives you." I sat down in Samuel's chair. For a long time, I simply held the folder. Then I removed the band. The first document was a letter from Samuel. "Ruth, if you are reading this, I am either gone or no longer able to explain it myself. Aaron loves this farm, but sometimes he loves what it could become more than he respects what it already is. He believes risk is courage. I have tried to teach him that risk taken with someone else's security is not courage. You know this land better than he thinks you do. Do not let grief convince you that you are helpless. Read everything in this file before you make a decision. Samuel." I pressed the paper against my chest and cried for the first time since the funeral. Not the quiet tears I had allowed people to see. I cried until my face hurt and my hands shook. Then I wiped my eyes and continued reading. The file contained the current operating agreement for Caldwell Creek Farm, LLC. I had signed it 6 years earlier, but I had never studied every section. Samuel had always handled the legal details. The ownership schedule was attached near the back. Before Samuel's death, I owned 70% of the voting interest. Samuel owned 20%. Aaron owned 10%. Another document stated that Samuel's interest would transfer to me upon his death under the company's succession agreement. That meant I now controlled 90% of the voting interest. Aaron did not own the farm. He owned 10% of the operating company. He also had authority to manage daily farming activities, but the agreement specifically prohibited him from borrowing more than $25,000, selling land, mortgaging property, or signing a long-term development agreement without written approval from the controlling member. That member was me. The next document was the recorded deed for the farmhouse and 40 surrounding acres. That property was not owned by the farm company. It had been owned by Samuel and me as joint tenants with right of survivorship. After his death, it became mine. The last documents explained why Samuel had become so careful. 8 months before he died, Aaron had proposed selling 80 acres along the county road to a developer planning a warehouse complex. Samuel had refused. Aaron had then approached the developer privately and suggested the family would reconsider after the next harvest. Samuel discovered the conversation and confronted him. The file included printed emails. In one of them, Aaron wrote, "My father is old-fashioned, but the transition will happen sooner than he thinks." I read that sentence 4 times. The transition. That was how my son described his father's death. Not as a loss. As a business opportunity waiting to happen. At the bottom of the file was a copy of a purchase option prepared for the developer. It had not been signed, but the proposed closing date was November 15. Aaron had already been negotiating to sell land he did not have the authority to sell. I did not confront him. That was the first decision I made entirely for myself. I placed every document back into the folder and called Samuel's attorney, Margaret Ellis. Margaret asked me to bring the file to her office. The next morning, she spent nearly 2 hours reviewing it. When she finished, she removed her glasses. "Ruth, has Aaron asked you to sign anything?" "Not yet." "Has he told you that he owns the farm?" "Yes." "He does not." "I understand that now. He may believe Samuel's will gives him more than it does." Aaron is named to receive certain equipment and his father's personal interest in several accounts, but the land and controlling ownership do not pass through that clause. Can he borrow against the farm? Not legally under this agreement without your written approval. What if he has already tried? Then we need to notify the bank and any lender he contacted. Margaret did not promise that one letter would solve everything. She explained that we needed certified copies, formal notices, and updated company records. We also needed to confirm whether Aaron had signed anything while presenting himself as the owner. For the next 10 days, I worked quietly. I filed the necessary documents confirming Samuel's death and my control of his company interest. Margaret prepared a written notice restricting Aaron's authority to routine operating expenses. The farm's bank removed him as the only authorized contact on the main business account. Mr. Harlan agreed that any new credit request would require my signature. We contacted the Omaha lender. Their representative confirmed that Aaron had submitted preliminary information for a loan of $850,000. The loan was intended to finance new grain storage, equipment, and land acquisition. The application listed Aaron as majority owner. That statement was false. The lender immediately suspended the application. Margaret also contacted the developer's attorney. We learned that Aaron had been discussing not only 80 acres, but 120. He had promised that the transaction would move forward once estate matters were completed. The developer had not acted illegally. They had not paid Aaron or recorded an option, but they had spent money on surveys and planning based on his statements. Their attorney withdrew the proposed agreement as soon as Margaret provided proof of ownership. Each discovery hurt, but the hurt was becoming clearer. Aaron was not simply impatient. He had built an entire plan around the belief that I would be too grief-stricken, too trusting, or too frightened to stop him. On the 15th day after his ultimatum, he came to the farmhouse with Marissa. This time, he carried a folder. "We need to settle the move," he said. I invited them inside. Marissa began measuring the dining room with her eyes. She looked toward the wall where Samuel's photograph still hung. "We thought we could repaint before Thanksgiving," she said. "Something lighter would make this room feel larger." I looked at Aaron. "You plan to live here." "It makes sense," he said. "I need to be closer to the operation." "And where do you expect me to go?" "We found a 2-bedroom unit at the retirement community." "I never agreed to move there." His voice hardened. "You cannot stay alone in this house forever." "I have been alone here for 7 weeks." "That is different." "How?" "Because we have given you time." I almost smiled at the word given. Aaron opened his folder and placed a document in front of me. It was an agreement stating that I would vacate the farmhouse by September 30 and allow Caldwell Creek Farm, LLC, to take possession. The company would supposedly cover my retirement community fees for 2 years. At the bottom was a signature line. "Why would the farm company take possession of property it does not own?" I asked. Aaron blinked. "It is all part of the farm." "No, it is." Marissa stepped closer to the table. "Ruth, we had someone review this." "Who?" "A business consultant." "The same consultant who received $12,000. Aaron's face changed. "How do you know about that?" "I read the bank statements." "You had no reason to interfere with operating expenses." "I own 90% of the company." Silence filled the kitchen. Marissa looked at Aaron. He stared at me as though I had spoken in another language. "That is not possible," he said. "It is documented. Dad left me the farm. He left you equipment, a personal account, and your existing ownership interest." "No." "He did not leave you control." Aaron pushed the agreement away from me. "You do not understand those documents." "I understand enough to know this house belongs to me." He stood so quickly that the chair scraped against the floor. "Who have you been talking to?" "Margaret Ellis." His face became pale. "You went to Dad's attorney behind my back." "I went to my attorney." Marissa touched his arm. "Aaron, maybe we should leave." He pulled away from her. "This is what he did," he said. "He kept control until the end, and now she is doing the same thing." I looked at my son. "What exactly were you planning to do with 120 acres? His anger disappeared. For one brief second, he looked like a frightened child. Then he recovered. "That land is underused. You promised it to a developer. I discussed an option. You told them estate matters were delaying the sale. It would have saved this operation." "Saved it from what?" He did not answer. I already knew. Margaret and I had reviewed the last 3 years of business records. Aaron had purchased equipment through a separate company he created with a friend. That company had lost money. He had personally guaranteed part of the debt. He needed the development sale and the new commercial loan to cover his mistake. "You were trying to use this farm to pay your private debts," I said. "It was temporary. You listed yourself as the majority owner on a loan application. The bank would never have approved it if I told them I owned 10%. That should have told you something." His eyes filled with fury. "I have worked this land for 20 years. So have I. You kept books and made lunches." I felt the insult, but I did not allow it to control my voice. "I negotiated our first operating loan while your father was in the hospital with pneumonia. I worked at the clinic so we could keep health insurance. I signed the note on the south field. I sold my mother's jewelry to repair the combine during the drought. Do not confuse work you noticed with work that mattered." Aaron looked away. Marissa lowered her eyes. I slid his 30-day notice across the table. "You gave me until September 30 to leave my home. I am giving you until September 30 to provide every company record, password, contract, and financial statement in your possession." He laughed bitterly. "And if I refuse?" "Your management authority has already been restricted. The bank has been notified. The Omaha application has been suspended. The developer has withdrawn." The color drained from his face. "You had no right." "I had 90% of the right." He stared at me for several seconds. Then he grabbed the folder and walked out. Marissa followed him without speaking. I stood at the window and watched their truck disappear down the gravel road. My hands were shaking. Quiet action does not mean action without fear. It means fear is not allowed to make the decision. 2 days later, Aaron sent me a message. "We need to talk before you destroy everything Dad built." I replied with one sentence. "Margaret's office, Friday at 10. The meeting lasted 3 hours. Aaron brought his own attorney. Margaret placed the operating agreement, succession records, bank statements, loan application, and development correspondence on the conference table. No one raised their voice. No one needed to. The documents did most of the speaking. Aaron's attorney asked for time to review the ownership structure. After a short break, he returned and spoke quietly to my son. Aaron's management position could be terminated by a vote of the controlling member. The proposed land sale could not proceed without my approval. The loan application contained inaccurate ownership information. And the company could demand repayment of any unauthorized expenses that had benefited Aaron's private business. I did not want my son arrested. I did not want to ruin him. I wanted the farm protected, and I wanted the truth acknowledged. So I offered him 3 choices. He could remain employed as operations manager under outside financial supervision. He could step away for 1 year while an independent manager reviewed the farm and he addressed his personal debts. Or I would purchase his 10% interest at a fair valuation, allowing him to leave the business completely. Aaron stared at the table. "You would buy me out of my own family farm. I am offering to buy your interest in a company you tried to use without permission. Dad wanted me here. Your father wanted you here when he believed you respected what we built." He looked at me then. "You always took his side. This is not about sides. It has always been about sides." For the first time, I understood part of what had been driving him. Aaron had spent his life trying to prove he was not merely Samuel Caldwell's son. Every limit felt like distrust. Every cautious decision felt like an insult to his ability. But understanding his resentment did not require me to finance it. "You are my son," I said. "I love you, but love does not turn false ownership into real ownership." He selected the buyout. The process took nearly 4 months. We hired an independent appraiser. Aaron's interest was valued based on the company's actual assets and debts. The unauthorized consulting expenses were deducted from the final amount with his agreement. His personal creditors received part of the payment. The rest gave him enough to begin again without taking our land with him. He and Marissa moved to Nebraska, where he accepted a position managing operations for a large seed company. For almost a year, he did not speak to me. I did not chase him. That was one of the hardest boundaries I had ever maintained. The first Thanksgiving after Samuel died, I ate dinner with neighbors. The chair across from me remained empty, and for a few moments, I wondered whether protecting the farm had cost me my family. Then I remembered something Samuel had written in his letter. Risk taken with someone else's security is not courage. Neither is forgiveness that requires you to surrender your safety. I hired a farm manager named Caleb Monroe, a 50-year-old man who had worked nearby for most of his life. He did not arrive with grand plans. He spent his first month listening. We repaired the north grain bin instead of replacing the entire storage system. We leased additional acreage rather than buying it. We paid down debt and placed every major decision in writing. The farm did not become twice as large. It became stable. The farmhouse remained mine. I repainted nothing. Samuel's photographs stayed on the dining room wall. His chair stayed beside the window until I was ready to move it. The maple tree turned bright orange that autumn. One afternoon, almost 18 months after our meeting, Aaron called. I recognized his number and let it ring twice before answering. "Hi, Mom," he said. His voice sounded older. "Hello, Aaron." He told me he had been attending financial counseling through his employer. He and Marissa had sold their oversized house. They were paying down what remained of his business debt. Then he became quiet. "I read Dad's letter," he said. I had given him a copy after the buyout. "What did you think?" "I hated it. I expected that. I thought he had written it because he did not trust me. And now I think he was afraid I would become exactly what I became." I sat down at the kitchen table. Aaron took a breath. "I am sorry I gave you 30 days to leave your own home." I closed my eyes. For months, I had imagined that apology. In some versions, I delivered a perfect speech. In others, I hung up. When the moment arrived, I said the truth. "You did not only try to take my home, you treated my grief like an opportunity." "I know. That will take time to forgive." "I know that too." We did not repair everything during that call. Real relationships do not heal because one person finally says the correct sentence. But it was a beginning. Aaron visited the following spring. He did not enter the farm office. He did not ask about the accounts or the acreage. We walked to the maple tree and stood beneath its new leaves. "I miss Dad," he said. "So do I." He looked toward the fields. "Do you ever think I could come back?" I understood what he was asking. Not whether he could return for dinner. Whether he could return to the farm. "Not as an owner," I said, "and not as the man who believed this place belonged to him." He nodded slowly. "That is fair. We are still rebuilding our relationship." Aaron calls every Sunday now. Sometimes we talk about the weather or crop prices. Sometimes we talk about Samuel. Sometimes the conversation lasts only 5 minutes. Trust returns differently than love. Love can survive a terrible decision. Trust has to be reconstructed through many smaller ones. The yellow legal pad Aaron placed on my table is still inside Samuel's file. His deadline is written across the top. September 30. Under it, in my own handwriting, I added another date. The day the ownership records were confirmed. I keep that paper not because I enjoy remembering what my son did. I keep it because it reminds me of what grief almost made me forget. I had not merely lived beside Samuel while he built a farm. I had built it with him. I was not a guest in my home. I was not an elderly problem waiting to be relocated. And I did not need to become cruel to prove that I was strong. My son gave me 30 days to leave the family farm. Instead, I used those 30 days to learn the truth, protect what my husband and I had built, and set a boundary that should have existed long before his funeral. Sometimes justice does not arrive with shouting, police lights, or a crowded courtroom. Sometimes it is a woman sitting quietly at her own kitchen table, reading every page before she signs her name. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can say to someone who has mistaken your love for weakness is simply this: "No, this home is not yours to take."